I'm gonna rewind. Hello, welcome to this Daily Bark. I'm Victor Vargas, and today we're going to talk about body language. That was really stupid. Okay, I'm gonna try not to gross you out with my seductive body language, but we're gonna talk about body language. And I'm probably going to say the stat wrong here, but I'll put the right stat up on the screen. There's a stat that says the words that are coming out of our mouth when we're communicating only represent about 3% of the communication. The other 97% of communication happens through body language, voice tonality, eye contact, gestures, all these other nuances that go on when we're communicating. And the words that we're using actually have very, very little to do with what we're saying. So how does that apply to composition? What I've found is that representation only is about 3 to 5% of what's important in a work of art. When you're looking at a work of art and you want to know what this work of art is, I almost never, and I try never, but almost never look at what's being represented. What I look at are what are the line directions being used, what are the curves being used, how are the spaces shaped, where is my eye moving to, how is my eye moving in and out of the piece. So I'm looking at value relationships and line relationships and thrusts and diagonals and how all these things work together. And that tells me quicker and more accurately what the art is about. It also tells me if the artist was successful at the work of art or not. I'm not judging the art, I'm judging the composition. And the composition is what we're doing. We're composing visual elements to communicate something. We're communicating visually. I will look at all these elements to tell me what the piece is. 90% of the communication happens through the design, through the composition of the piece, not through the representation. And so you can have two people in a composition, but if you manage the nuances of those people, they can either be in love or they could be hating each other. Now, you don't need to represent or in the faces. You don't need to represent love or represent anger or hatred or disgust or disappointment or whatever word you want to use. You can do it simply by managing your lines. If I have a couple and they're leaning towards each other, they're in love. If they're leaning away from each other, they're not really connected. And so you can have them exactly the same, but just by managing your lines differently, you're going to exude out a different meaning. A lot of times artists who are not aware of this are trying to compose love, but they put the people on an angle like this. And so though they're saying this is love, 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 97% of the design is telling you no, 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 no. And so this is why you want to really become very aware, self-aware, and aware of your composition and how you manage your lines and your curves and all this stuff, because this stuff communicates. A lot of times you'll have a subject here, but the value relationship puts the highest point of contrast over here, and so therefore, even though this is your subject, this is where your eye goes to. And again, representation versus composition will always win. What our job is to, as composers, is to bring all of these elements in together so that our lines, our curves, our values, our textures, our colors harmonize, all relate, all unify, all come together and support. That's the word I'm looking for. They support the representation or the meaning of the piece or the sensation that you're trying to convey. And so always think about that. Representation is important, but it's really not that important. And so you can have all kinds of different styles, but if the composition is not right, the piece fails. And I know that's really, really hard for a lot of people to hear. But if you're really trying to become an effective composer, an effective storyteller, pictorial storyteller, an effective communicator of vision, a communicator of ideas visually, if you want to transmit an emotion or a sensation, or translate an idea that's abstract and you want to translate it concrete, then you need to have standards. You need to say, okay, is this working? Is this not working? Is this effective? Is it not effective? Is it conveying that which I want it to convey? Or is it not? And you have to be honest with yourself if you want to be a pro at this. Okay? Now, if you only want a hobby and you want to play around, then go do whatever you want. But if you want to become serious, if you want people to look at your work and still feel it and still resonate with it, 100 years from now, you must focus on composing. Degas said, and I love this quote, there are better painters than I, but because I remember I'm a draftsman first, I will be the one that they remember. And so in his day, he understood legacy. He understood the long-term thinking of this, and he focused on drafting, aka composition. So composition is 97% of what you are communicating.